Believers say, whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause, and therefore God. To a lot of people, this sounds really convincing. But let's examine whether the argument is actually sound. The first premise says, everything that begins to exist has a cause. But what is a thing? A thing, as far as we understand, is something that exists. And existence, as far as we understand, requires space. And so far, we have no evidence of any space beyond the universe, if beyond even exists. When argument says everything, it can only refer to things that exist inside the universe, because that's what we know of. And inside the universe, yes, causation is a well-observed principle. But does that mean the same principle applies to the universe itself? Let's use a simple analogy. Imagine a chessboard. We know that inside the chessboard, pieces follow certain rules. But does that mean those rules apply to the chessboard itself? Of course not. In other words, rules that apply inside a system cannot be assumed to apply to the system itself. Similarly, we see laws and principles operating within the universe, but that does not mean these laws can explain the existence of the universe itself. That's the first major problem. Then there is another problem. The argument claims everything that begins to exist is a cause. But we have never observed anything actually begin to exist in a true sense. Everything we observe is just existing matter and energy, interacting, rearranging, transforming into new shapes and forms. So before making a sweeping claim that everything that begins to exist is a cause, we would first need to observe something that genuinely began to exist. And here is a deeper issue. Can anything even begin to exist? I mean, something that didn't exist at all, not its components, not its ingredients, nothing. For something like that to begin to exist, even if there was a God, he would have to create it ex nihilo, out of absolute nothing. But can that happen? What is nothing? Where has anyone ever observed something emerging from literal nothingness? So premise 1 is flawed on 3 levels. First, causation is a principle inside the universe, and the premise doesn't specify that, and later even ignores that. Second, it makes a universal claim without a single observed example of something truly beginning to exist, and not just arrangements and change made in form. Third, the very idea that things can begin to exist implies things can come from nothing, which believers themselves reject. Now let's look at the second premise. The universe began to exist. We have strong evidence that the expansion of the universe had a beginning, but we do not know if the universe itself had an absolute beginning. So even premise 2 goes beyond what science actually says. Therefore, both premises rest on assumptions that are either unobserved or misapplied, which means this is an unsound argument and doesn't serve as an evidence for God.